All right, boys. So we did some more Azmeri testing, and I actually have some somewhat surprising results. As you can see, this is the loot that we dropped from a fairly juiced region in the Atlas. I mean, I had 4 towers here. We were able to put a lot into it, and again, the results are interesting. Okay, so we ran however many maps that all the green ones have been ran. Some of them I did use the tablet that allows you to run them twice. So some of them we did run twice. Some of them I straight up failed because the bosses with Azmeri spirits sometimes are absolutely brutal. So if you're doing a juiced, T15, T16 with Delirium and the Azmeri spirits, you need to have a pretty powerful build. The bosses get pretty out of control. And to put it in perspective, I can essentially two-shot tier 4 breach boss, and some of these I actually had to fight these bosses and play the mechanics and stuff. They get very, very, very powerful. So with that being said, again, here's our region. All the green ones are the ones that we ran, kind of right around here. So it was a decent amount of maps. It was probably, again, somewhere right around 20 maps run if you include, the ones that we failed versus, the ones we were able to run twice and all that kind of stuff. So it's about 20 maps again. And this is the loot that we're looking at. And again, you're sitting here looking like, oh, you dropped some pretty good items here and stuff like that. All the currency and all this kind of stuff dropped from just, juicing the maps just like you normally would. We did include some breaches in there and stuff. So all the currency and stuff, we didn't get much as far as talismans go. We did actually end up getting 1 rabbit talisman. And what's funny about that is this actually dropped in one of the towers. Like I ran into an orange spirit while I was running through a tower. It fell on something and we dropped a rabbit. So it fell in a map that didn't even have any juice on it, like really at all. It might have been juiced a little by a previous tower or whatever, but it wasn't a big map. It wasn't anything like that. So we did get one, but interestingly enough, it was just from just kind of a non-juiced map, So it is what it is. However, what's interesting about this is you drop an insane amount of tier 4 and 5 rare items. So what I think this would be really, really good for is kind of like mid to late game, right at the start of a league when people don't have a ton of great items, because you really do drop some ridiculous rares, and so that, for instance, again, I tried to fracture this, but this dropped like this. The only thing that was missing was the attribute requirements. I slammed that on, but it dropped with +2 arrows, dex, 600 accuracy, 137 fizz, and elemental damage with attacks. If you drop this in the first month of the league, this is an absolutely insane item, right? So again, I was like, okay, here's a body armor that we dropped. It's got 1200 evasion, 500 ES, double resistance, stun threshold, which is really good for Roa. So these are all very, very high-end usable. This late in the league, they might sell for a few divines here or there, but earlier in a league, these items are exceptional, and here's one here, right? This one, this is an armor evasion, it's got triple res, 200 life on it. Like, these are the types of items that we're dropping from the bosses. So there is a world where these are pretty good. Here's a ring, right? This ring just dropped like this. Like, I put the quality, catalyst or whatever into it. But like, this is a nice ring to just drop, from a boss. So that's kind of the one caveat of this. And I actually do think that next league, I'm going to run this early, so long as everything kind of stays in place, not for the talismans or anything like that, but just simply for the rare items. I was actually quite impressed. If you guys watched the last video, that I was kind of pissed, honestly. Like, it was so bad. The loot was so bad from the wisps that it was crazy. So again, this is the one kind of benefit that I found, is that juicing up the bosses, you drop some really, really insane rares. So, take that as you will. I didn't really go over the strategy last time just because it was so bad and I spent so much money. It just didn't even feel worth it. So I will kind of briefly go over how I set this up, and the tablets that I use, because this is something that I think that I will like to do in the future, but earlier in a league, so that I can actually use these items. Look for items for me to use. Solo self-found, this would be a great strategy for a solo self-found character. So again, it's definitely a different vibe than the last video, but here it is. So what we were using is we were using double quantity tablets for bosses. We use this in every single tower. So 14 quant from items from map bosses, and then also another 7 quant just from drops in your maps, right? And then we used quant Azmeri spirits. And then we used 1 season of the hunt just so that map bosses are hunted by Azmeri spirits. Now, what is nice about this is you don't actually have to let an Azmeri spirit like travel through the map and infect a boss. It's just already infected when you go into the boss room. So that's kind of it's kind of really nice. You don't have to deal with the actual mechanic at all. You're just kind of putting an Azmeri spirit on the boss and fighting it. And like I said earlier, some of them are very, very difficult. They get very, very difficult. So just keep that in mind. Unless you have an absolutely death-proof build, you probably will take a few deaths here and there. My build is fairly squishy, but my damage output is crazy, and my damage output wasn't enough to just kind of delete bosses. I did have to kind of play and evade and, do all that kind of stuff. But this is pretty nice, and this is a very cheap tablet. These are only, a couple, a chaos or whatever. So these are super cheap. And then I did throw in a couple breach tablets just because I was afraid of kind of ruining the whole region and not getting anything and just wasting my time and not getting any currency, and all that. So I did sneak a couple breach tablets in there just so I could have a way to actually, make some money and get some drops. So, I probably could have juiced it a little bit more and got some more rare items and whatnot, but that's kind of what we used. As far as maps, pretty standard stuff. We were trying to run 8 mod corrupted T15s when possible, with rarity and quantity would be the ideal. And then, rare monsters have an additional mod or whatever. Pretty standard stuff for running juiced endgame maps, T16s, whatever it was. So these are kind of, and then we were using the distilled paranoia just to add more rare monsters onto the maps. So all that is kind of standard to my, that was kind of my constant for all of these different tests, was I kind of kept the maps and the delirium the same. So that was how we did that. And now just again, real quickly, we'll kind of go through this, and then we're actually going to go Gamba these, we'll corrupt these, all that kind of stuff. But just to kind of get a little more in depth, we did make a lot of money. So we dropped, a season of the hunt, dropped a couple of the normal ones. We dropped a well-rolled breach, and we dropped 2 visions of paradise. These are 3-4 divines apiece. So these are pretty, well, I guess people are listing them in annulment. So I don't know what that converts to, but I paid, I think, like for the one I used to run, I think I paid like 56 chaos or something like that. So what's that, like 3 divines ish? So again, that's kind of a nice little come up. These rares, again, if we were a little earlier in a league and more people were playing, I absolutely think these sell for a reasonable amount. Maybe now this late in the league, they might not. But again, I am impressed with some of these. I mean, these are absolutely usable items. And, it's pretty cool. We got a few spears. This one's worth like a divine. This one's rolled okay. We're going to corrupt it here in a second. This one. So we got a couple, unique items. These aren't much, but, again, we're just going to corrupt them. A few more reliquary keys. A few level 20 skill gems. Again, they did up that just recently. Same thing with the perfects. So we got 3 20s, 2 perfects, 14 chances, a couple of nulls, 8 divines. We've got probably 5 or 6 divines worth of chaos, and then whatever, maybe 1.5 divines worth of exalted orbs. So again, and then the big one is we did get a rabbit talisman. So that's kind of my findings. This is what we used. Let me show you the atlas so that you can get an idea of what we did here. So again, we focused as much as we could just into juicing, breach precursors and explicit modifiers. And then we do creep into the Azmeri spirit section. I did stay away from the spirit type selector. My thought was that if I create a higher chance for one of these to spawn, it would make a lower chance for the really rare one that we want to see to spawn. I don't know if that's true or not. That was just kind of my thought process. And I also didn't care about any 3 of these colors. So it just felt like a couple wasted points to me. Again, maybe if you guys did some testing and this felt like this was better or whatever, let me know. But that was my thought process as to why I didn't take this. I just didn't want it to interfere with my chances of getting the rare one that is not on there. So this was the atlas. Again, I still haven't done my last art. I guess those don't even matter. But, this was kind of the atlas tree. Nothing special. All pretty standard stuff. But yeah, again, there's some level of like this late in the league, it wasn't the most impressive strategy. However, this is something that I might run early next league just to farm up some really nice rare items as I'm trying to get to a point where I can then craft my own items. So that's that. Pretty quick. Again, far less disappointing than the just standard Azmeri Wisp farm. And with that being said, let's Gamba this stuff. All right, I will cut to the Gamba. All right, reliquary number 1. Headhunter. Okay, not quite close. That's close. All right, number 2, and I actually don't even know if you can get a Headhunter out of here. I'm just assuming. Okay, nope. Okay, not a Mage Blood. Okay. All right, and now we corrupt these. See what happens. All right, another socket. Couple chaos. This one hit overcap attack speed. Okay, it says few divines. Again, this late in the league. I don't know. Okay, this one hit a double socket. Couple divines, and this one I think went down on crit chance, so I think that one's bricked. Okay, so either way, I mean, these are worth a couple divine. I guess we'll have to find out. But that's that. Okay, so, and lastly, these started showing up in my filter for chancing bases, and I don't know what this chance is, but we're just going to send on it. So if you guys know what the Sacred Focus chance is into, please let me know. Otherwise, I guess we'll just delete these. Okay, yeah, so I still don't know what okay, so yeah, nothing. All right, that's the end of that. But that's that, guys. So again, here's the loot. We had a couple nice corruptions here. I guess I'll look a little deeper into that. Again, loot was fine, very unrelated to the wisps outside of the rares, so just keep that in mind for next season. This could be a very, very nice farm for farming up some items, especially in solo self-found. Again, the bosses are super difficult. So I will leave it at that. Again, I appreciate you guys. Like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And we'll see you on the next one. Peace out, guys.